For this lecture, we are returning to historical literature. We've been hanging out for a little while in the prophets, and now we're going to go to the continuing story. What happens to the people of God after the exile? How does it end? And you already kind of know, because we do have to touch on that when we work through the prophets, but we're going to zoom in on the history of God's people, and where we find that is in Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah deal with what it's like for the people when the exile ends, when they're allowed to return to the land of Canaan. So here we are in Ezra and Nehemiah. We'll get it moving here. All right. The first thing that I want you to look at is our fun-filled Old Testament timeline. Hopefully you have this written somewhere and you have been working on memorizing it. You needed it for the past exam, so hopefully that's well in place. This is where we are right now. When we get to Ezra and Nehemiah, the exile has ended, and the people are allowed to return from where they are in Mesopotamia back to the land of Canaan. So this is exciting. You should be like, oh my goodness, they get to return. This is going to be a great thing. So what I want you to do is think with me about our 3 covenants and the status of these covenants. So when the people are allowed to return to the land in 539, when the exile ends and they're allowed to return, we've got this covenant with Abraham back in place, because we definitely have land. They're back in the land. We've got descendants, and the people should be feeling blessed, but we're going to kind of complicate that narrative a little bit. Another thing that's going to happen is that the people are going to be, and we'll see this as we continue through Ezra and Nehemiah, we're going to have certain folks that are very concerned with this covenant with Moses. As you can imagine, they've just come back from the exile. They don't want it to happen again. And one surefire way to ensure that the exile doesn't happen again and the curses of the covenant don't come upon them is to follow this law and obey the law of Moses, because if you obey, you will be blessed, and if you disobey, you will be cursed. The disobedience is what took them into exile in the first place. So we're going to find when the people of God return to the land of Canaan, that there are some kind of anal retentive people that are going to really push for enforcing the law of Moses in a big way. Now, this is the one, this covenant with David is the one that, I'm sorry for those of you that really love sandwiches, but we never have this bottom bun quite in place after the people of God return. We've got the covenant with Abraham. We've got people working really hard to follow the covenant with Moses. But the one thing that we don't have in place is this covenant with David, because even after the people of God return to the land of Canaan, they are not really governing themselves. Instead, Cyrus, the Persian king, is the one who is in charge. And so even though you've got 2 parts of your covenant, you don't have the bottom part. And so for those of you who do like gluten-free and eat hamburgers without buns, we're not even helping you out. Like, we've got the top bun, we've got the middle portion, but we don't have the bottom, which would make for an awkward sandwich. And you're going to kind of feel that tension as we move through Ezra and Nehemiah. Of, wait, we're lacking this bottom part of the sandwich. All right, this is what I want to show to you next, because I want you to keep tracking with me. Early on, when we were doing the Deuteronomistic history, we had Assyria. They were our big players in Mesopotamia until they were taken over by Babylon. When Babylon took them over, we had a struggle in the Deuteronomistic history to figure out, well, should we pay taxes to Babylon or not? Well, after some period of time during the exile, the people of God go into exile, and then Babylon is overtaken by Persia. And so this is the order of events that I want you to have in mind when you think about Mesopotamia. Our very first one that we dealt with was Assyria, then Babylon, and now Babylon has been overtaken, and they have been overtaken by Persia. And I don't know if this is helpful to you or not, but one of the ways that you can maybe put this together is through an acronym. So we've got A first, right? Assyria, A first. Then we've got B. And then finally, we've got Persia, which is a P, so it's not really ABC, but the king is Cyrus, so we do have a C. So if that helps you to remember who's in charge, who the cats are in Mesopotamia, then go with it. A, B, C, and Persia is C for Cyrus. But that's who's in charge at this point in time. The people of God went into exile. They were living over here. They went into exile under Babylonian rule, and then Persia came in and took over this area. And now Persia is in charge. So here are some of your Persian rulers. Please don't write all of these down. You don't need to know all of them. I've simply highlighted for you here, I've bolded for you the ones that are mentioned in the biblical text. You don't need to memorize them. The one that you're concerned with right now, as we are in Ezra and Nehemiah, is Cyrus, because Cyrus is going to do a completely new thing. You'll notice that Cyrus is the one who in 539 comes in and takes over Mesopotamia, bumps out the Babylonians, and he is going to do something completely new and completely different. And here's a little taste of it from your world behind the text. So the world behind the text, we've got what archaeologists refer to as the Cyrus cylinder. It's this piece of clay, and I'm going to link to you this video on Blackboard that you can watch that tells you more about the Cyrus cylinder, but it's this cylinder thing made out of clay, and it's got writing in cuneiform all over it. And what it is, it contains an edict by Cyrus the Great of Persia, this new king that's taken over Babylon, allowing the exiles to return to their native lands. And we've got exiles from all over the place, not only from Judah, though we've got a lot of Judahites that want to go back to the land of Canaan. They want to go back to Judah. We've got folks from all sorts of different places. And Cyrus the Great of Persia says, all y'all can go home and you can worship your local gods. And so you might want to watch this little Smithsonian video that talks about the Cyrus cylinder, because it really is a new thing. Cyrus the Great comes to town and he's like, you know what? You don't have to worship the Persian gods. You don't have to do Persian things. I'm going to let all y'all go home and you can do your own thing. I'm still going to be in charge of you, but you can do your own thing. So this is completely new for the ancient Near East. We haven't seen this before, but Cyrus is trying out a new thing. Now, what I want you to do is turn to Ezra 1 with me. It's going to take me a hot second to get there because I have not turned to it before this class. Sorry. Ezra, Job, Psalms, and Proverbs. There we go. I'm in Ezra now. All right, so if you're looking in your No app, I'm on page 669. All right, so in the first year, I want you to notice how the book of Ezra begins, because it begins with this return from the exile. In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, remember that Cyrus got mentioned in the book of Isaiah as maybe the Messiah that fulfills this covenant with David. Ezra is not going to look at it that way, but let's see how Ezra does think about Cyrus. Ezra is not going to say that Cyrus is a Messiah, but definitely going to say that Cyrus is a tool of Yahweh. In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, in order that all the word of the Lord through the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia, so that he sent a herald throughout all the kingdom, and also written in an edict declared. Now, I want you to notice just in that very first verse, actually, that the one who is responsible for this edict from Cyrus is the Spirit of the Lord. And so when the author of Ezra goes to tell this story of the people of God returning from exile, this author is going to say, it wasn't really Cyrus who was responsible for it. Rather, it was God, it was Yahweh who did this. So who's responsible for Cyrus's edict? The Spirit of the Lord. Thus says the king, Cyrus of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem of Judah. Now you should hear little tones of David, because Cyrus is saying, hey, Yahweh's in charge of me, And Yahweh has stirred up my soul so that I want to build a temple in Judah. However, we're not going to hear from Ezra that Cyrus is the Messiah. Rather, we're going to hear that somebody else is. And remember that Messiah doesn't necessarily mean everything that you have started to associate with Jesus. But in this context, in the Old Testament, it means anointed one. It means a king in the line of David. All right, so the Lord of heaven wants me to build him a house. Any of those among you who are his people, may their God be with them, are now permitted to go to Jerusalem and Judah and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. And let all the survivors, whatever place they reside, be assisted by the people of their place with silver and gold and goods and with animals, besides free will offerings for the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. All right, so Ezra's interpretation of what Cyrus is doing is that Cyrus is moved by God to allow people to return to Judah to rebuild the temple. And this is a big deal because they want to reestablish that permanence that they once had in the land of Canaan. They want to reestablish the covenants and get Yahweh living in Jerusalem again. And so when all seemed to be lost, when you read about the exile, now everything seems like it's back on. And we've got this double thumbs up going, like maybe Yahweh is going to reestablish all of this. And so there's incredible hope at the beginning of Ezra, but it's going to get complicated, like I've already mentioned to you. We've got this revisiting of this hope, and maybe God is going to renew things, and God's going to have a temple again in Jerusalem, and maybe all of those covenants in the covenant sandwich are going to be back in place. But it gets complicated, and that's what I'll leave you with for now.